God, this is embarrassing because I hope he doesn't hear this, but like, I literally am like, I can't believe that the guitar player of the Bouncing Souls is texting it to me. This band is still means the world to me.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was the Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, feel free to support the podcast if you've been listening for a while by signing up for my Patreon over at patreon.com/thiswasthescene. You can sign up for $1 a month. That's all I charge, and I will love you forever. Nick Storch is a premier booking agent as Angelo from Grieving Eucalyptus, episode 116. You can go listen to that afterwards. Explains in his Instagram introduction to Nick. Nick's been involved in the scene for a very long time, and as the premier booking agent, again, as Angelo has stated, here's the roster of bands that he has worked with through the years and currently works with. Bouncing Souls, Face to Face, Kill Your Idols, Fairweather, Hope Conspiracy, Breaking Pangaea, Darkest Hour, Ghost, Frank Turner, Ice-T, Sevendust, Baroness, Underoath, and a fucking shit ton more. Nick grew up in the Pennsylvania scene, playing in a band and promoting shows, and then finally becoming the premier booking agent. I was lucky enough to get him on the Skype, and this is what we talk about. Managing the Bouncing Souls, his obsession with vintage merch, his band The Side Effects with an A, kind of being a part of getting Plow United to play Riot Fest, recording at the Creep House, the funny story that involves Angelo from Grieving Eucalyptus, signing Coheed and Cambria, working with Sparta, and a ton more. If you do sign up for Patreon, I just uploaded a behind the wall, as they call it on Patreon, episode of my thoughts on the Brian Fallon and Brendan Kelly interview that they just launched over at Road to the Skeleton Coast. They talked about Lane Meyer here and there, and I had some opinions on what they were talking about, so I recorded my, I guess, rebuttal or addition to, and I put that at Patreon. So again, patreon.com/thiswasthescene, and you can go check it out. Two other ways to support the podcast. One, you can donate one time on thiswasthescene.com. There's a purple button on the top of the page or the web page. You can just click that, and you can Venmo whatever you want. You can PayPal whatever you want. And that just helps keep the lights on over here at the This Was the Scene office, aka my apartment. Two, you could buy merch on thiswasthescene.com. I've got hoodies, I've got t-shirts, I got like a pillow. I'm trying to think of some new ideas to sell that people would want to buy because I don't know if it's really cool to wear a shirt with a logo of a podcast, but there's a cool one if you're from Jersey, because the podcast initially was focused on just Jersey to begin with, and it's like the state of New Jersey that has This Was the Scene inside of it. That's been the most popular one. It's pretty cool. I actually wear that one myself to support myself. Great. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. I'm trying to think of what to title this one because you've been in the industry, you're still in the industry. You've worked with many bands that many people know. I just went down an Every Time I Die like rabbit hole and realized I follow Keith, but I used to follow his brother Jordan, and then I just started following Andy and the band because me and my buddy John, every time Every Time I Die release comes out, like we'll message each other. Mostly it's him finding it out first because he works for Complex, so he gets the shit pretty fast or knows about stuff. So the Desperate Live, what was the one that just came out? Just Desperate.
Oh, right. Of
Are you
course,
still
you're gonna ask
managing
me
them?
some.
I'm just like reading this as if you're still managing them, but like I could be, you could be like that was like 15 years ago.
Oh no, I still work with those guys. They're
Okay.
they're in the pile of one of my longest standing clients, actually.
Okay. Yeah, they just put out 2 songs on Spotify, so my friend John sent them to me the other day, and I was just
Oh,
like,
right, Desperate Pleasures. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was like, Jesus Christ, this band's so good. So yeah. So as in doing a little bit of research, which I typically never do, I guess usually I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's because we all have an attachment to that scene. The majority of people that I've interviewed, I've never met, but we can talk about that time because we lived in it, and there's just this automatic just conversation that comes from that, which is pretty cool.
Very much so. Very
Yeah.
much so. I mean, it was just such a pivotal time in all of our growing up and discovering. It was very regional. The idea of the local band being a big deal that doesn't really exist like it anymore, really at all. with a few
Actually,
exceptions.
that's interesting because you have a clear view on the new scene, I guess you'd say, or the industry now. So you don't, so they're literally, I thought that there was when I talk about like the Philly area with Title Fight, Balance and Composure when they were around Tiger's Jaw. Every time I would see those guys on YouTube, it looked like there was a local scene going on, but outside of that, I have no idea what's going on in, Minnesota or Illinois or, anywhere.
I mean, to say that it doesn't exist at all would be a bit much. But yeah, Philly and there's a few other cities that do have them or regions, but it's not like it once was 20 years ago or 25 years ago when it was in Philly. You had like the whole creep scene. Then there was like the Jersey scene with Humble Beginnings and all that stuff. Nothing like that.
Do you think you just see it like that because you're not that age living in it?
Maybe, maybe. But I don't. But if you look at like the record label scene today, it's not as robust. Back then, there was all these little labels that they put out each other's friends, and the Venn diagram. You know what I mean, of that region. It's a great question. I'm going to stand by what I've said because think about it. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Okay. I think about this a lot. You think of a really big band and they're from this town X, but you never see them out and about. But then I'm 42 years old. I'm not out and about either.
Exactly.
You know? So yeah, I think there's some validity to it, but I still believe that the idea of a band being a big local band doesn't exist like it once did.
It's funny. I just did an interview that it's not at well when yours comes out, it'll have come out. But I asked him, do you think that if we were to take ourselves from 20 years ago and had us listen to the shit we're talking about now, if we'd feel the same? Like, would we have the same eyes? We talk about it in this big nostalgia. This is the greatest time in our lives. Like, do you think when we were 19, 18 to 20, whatever, like we would look at what we're saying and go, oh yeah, it does feel like that? Or we'd be like, I think you're a little off.
I would still agree, at least from my personal vantage point.
Yeah.
Because I was fortunate to stay in the business. Like, it's how I make a living. And so maintaining the relationship to music helps me stay, I think, relevant to my business.
Mm-hmm.
I still think, because I think about this from time to time, because I represent the Bouncing Souls, who are the first real punk band I saw in a real punk venue in like in a warehouse space.
Okay.
And so I still to this day, when I get a text from one of those guys or we're talking about things, I still have to pinch myself. Like, I can't believe this is happening.
That's so cool.
I still don't. Like when Pete and I will text just about lives, like he's got a kid, I've got kids, and God, this is embarrassing because I hope he doesn't hear this, but like, I literally am like, I can't believe that the guitar player with the Bouncing Souls is texting with me. This band still means the world to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh no, it really does mean a lot to me. Like the first time I sat down with all of the guys, I made it a point to remind them about that show, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we remember that place," and because I just had to bring it up and get it over with.
That's so wild. That's so cool.
Yeah, like I still vividly remember getting the email from their former manager saying like, "Hey, we're gonna be looking for a new agent. Do you have any ideas?" And I wrote back immediately like, "Yeah, me," and then I immediately went out to lunch with a coworker, and I'm just like mulling it over. Like, I can't not work with this band. It would hurt so badly not to represent them.
Did you feel because you were such a fan, you had like a little bit of imposter syndrome right there, just being like, oh wait a minute, I don't know if I'm not say worthy, but in a joking way, like Wayne's World style, where you're like,
kind of, yes, kind of, a little bit. When I first started out in the business, I remember specific meetings with bands, whether they were just so big that I was intimidated by that, or I was a fan and just blew it. But now, as I've gotten older and I realize they all get up and put their pants on one leg at a time or whatever, I can handle it better. But yeah, it's that band in particular, though, because that was such a critical turning point for me. My best friends, who are still my best friends, we all went to that show. We all learned what stage diving was. We saw Plow United. I mean, I remember my best friend Mike, who's like my oldest friend in the entire world, bought the first Bouncing Souls album on vinyl. He let me borrow it that night so I could tape it on my parents' stereo and have it and give it back in the morning at school. And
I bet they'll love hearing that.
yeah, I mean,
Like, thanks for taking our money, man.
nah, they're sweethearts. They're actually some of the nicest humans I get to work with.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think Brian, there's this New Jersey pop punk group on Facebook, which basically was the reason I started this podcast. And when the quarantine started happening, Jay Vix, who started the group, he started doing these quarantunes live events where he would just get like one person from their house and they'd play acoustic guitar or whatever setup was, and he'd have like 6 or 8 acts. And then Brian ended up playing on one of them back in, I think, August or July. And at the end, did he? I kind of came into it late, but I saw him. Jay was talking to him because Jay will do an after hours where he brings everyone back on and everyone's just talking and just bullshitting for like 2 hours. And he was just talking to him and he was just like the nicest fucking guy. I was like, yeah, this is why this is why they loved that band back then, and this is why they're still relevant, you know. But obviously
Oh
still making
yeah,
good music, but you can't, if you know, obviously dickhead bands can still make it, but if you're a really good band, that's going to carry with the name. And every person who's ever talked about the Souls has always been like they're the shit. They're such good guys.
they are. But I'll also say they made a really smart decision a number of years ago where they stopped being full time, and I think it allowed them to kind of reappreciate each other. Um,
Yeah.
and I thought the last full length, which is of course I'm going to forget the name, Simplicity. I truly believe was a very impassioned, like they didn't just force it out to make a record. They actually wanted to make a record with each other, and I think the songs come through with that. And I told them that. I was like, it's, because not every, some of these bands, and I don't judge them for it. I think you're 18 or whatever, you get in a band and you just think you're going to have fun, and you blink and you're older, you've got kids, you've got mortgages, so you kind of have to do it to keep going. But they were fortunate to have other things in their lives so they could just focus on that, and then came back to the band. And I think it really came out because
I
it
mean,
was just a
yeah.
great record.
Well, that's a hard thing too, is that you've been doing that with the same four guys have been doing it this whole time. So obviously there's a point where you're going to get sick of each other, or things are going to go stale, and you got to just reassess and say, how do we bring this back to life, or how do we keep going with this thing to keep going?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's pretty smart. I haven't heard that record. I haven't listened to it at all, so I'll have to check that out. There's a lot of records now that bands have done since, like any band I've interviewed from back then, I remember their old stuff, but when they're talking about their newer things, I'm like, I haven't listened to it because I kind of fell off of it. So it's weird that my focus has stayed there. But now in doing this podcast, my eyes have been open to things that have been released. So I'll go and listen to it. I'm like, fuck, man, I really like kind of left that behind a little bit.
I totally understand. I have certain bands like that. I'm just in this weird place where even though I'm 42, I don't think I'm 42 at all. And so a lot of these bands like are just as exciting to me now. The Bouncing Souls, Rancid. I'm trying to think of the others, but
It's so hard to think of a band on the spot like this. Anytime, like through this interview, you'll probably try to think of that. It's like back in the day where we'd walk into a record store and you had 10 albums on your mind. As soon as you walk through those doors, you're like, fuck, what
yep.
was I going to buy? God damn it.
Oh, that happens to me all the time. And then I'll just get stuck on the band for hours or for days and weeks because I just can't get myself out of the zone on it. But yeah, no, there's definitely bands where you're like, oh my God. Same thing happened with the last Face to Face record.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Totally checked out for a number of reasons. Again, life takes you in different places and what have you. And then I got asked if I was interested in working with them. I was like, well, of course. I still remember seeing them with the Suicide Machines and Automatic 7 at the Trocadero. And I was like, let me just check the record. I was like, yo, this is great.
Yeah.
They actually made a great record. And I know that sounds like maybe dismissive of like, how would they make a great record? But I really thought it was great. The production was great.
Yeah, there's Bent But Not Broken, I think, is a song with a sick ass bass line in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Yep.
started that. I was like, I added that. Anytime I listen to a song now or a band that I love, and back in the day, I used to keep a piece of paper in my wallet that had the record that I needed to buy or the band I needed to buy a record from. Now I just go on Spotify, I just drag the song into my playlist and I listen to it there. And now I'm down the street from a vinyl shop, so I'll go in there and look for shit and buy vinyl now, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. I never got into vinyl after all these
Oh,
years.
it's the
Still,
greatest thing, dude. It is so, it's like therapy. It's so fucking awesome. I don't,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm that way with merch. Like I've at every given moment, I'm waiting for 5, just 6 or 7 packages to arrive. Either it's new stuff or it's old stuff. Like I got an old Bouncing Souls Neurotic T-shirt maybe like a year ago, and I was just so excited to have it.
That's awesome.
So, well, because all that stuff's, the vintage world has become massive in the last few years, and you just kind of hang around long enough, and you'll pick up some gems that maybe someone else doesn't care about, but you do.
Well, we're in that classic era now. It's almost like, when's a car become classic? Is it 20 years?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know shit about cars, but I knew there was like a certain
Same.
decade number. But all right, let's go back a little bit. And
Okay.
so typically I structure this as kind of going back in time, and it's always across the board. It's either bands or recording studios or labels or booking agents. I talked to Alex Sardi. I don't know if you ever met him along the
Mm-hmm.
way. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, I interviewed him, and that was a blast because we talked about the Binghamton scene. And he had never played in a band. He was a guy who started booking shows, then became a roadie for Midtown, and then it just advanced him in his career as being a manager. And it's so fascinating to me because you're the guys who actually were able to make a lucrative lifestyle, or were able to make a career in the music industry, which is so funny because the bands themselves can struggle, and then but the people went on to be engineers or managers, like they're the ones who could actually live off of this. So it's cool getting your perspective on what the fuck got you into this. So Angelo had said that you started off booking shows, but I want you to talk about like what introduced you to the scene was it Central PA?
Yeah, Lancaster. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So how did you trip over the scene and find it?
So I was in the middle school, and it started with, just whatever was on MTV we liked. I loved and still do things that are offensive or counterculture or make a statement that you're not like everybody else. And I remember when Green Day hit, and at first I didn't like it or get it. It was a little like, who are they? They got short hair and colored hair and tattoos. I'm not sure. And I kept hearing it. I was like, no, this is fucking sick. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, yes. And then, of course, at that age, you fully reinvent yourself overnight. I needed a wallet chain. I needed shirts that are striped instead of just regular T-shirts. And then as that wore on, I remember my friend Ben, he was the one who got us a flyer for that Bouncing Souls show. And it was percolating because of, Green Day, and they were taking out and supporting other bands in the scene. And I don't know, I think it was my group of friends who I'm still close friends with, who in fact I'm blowing off on a Zoom call in 20 minutes to talk to you.
That's right.
Yeah, we just all kind of threw ourselves. My best friend Mike and I used to go to the record stores all the time, and it was, you buy this one, I'll buy that one. We'll tape it for each other and trade tomorrow before school starts. And just headlong into that.
How old are you? How old are you when this happened?
I mean, punk for me was like 9th grade, but Mike and I became friends in 7th grade, and back then we were reading Rip magazine. I vividly remember science class, Mr. Martin's class. He gave us extra time to do our homework, and we were like, well, we'll just do this at home. Yo, do you have the new Rip magazine? Let's see what Alice in Chains is doing, or this band or that band. And we got yelled at so badly for that. I give you time to do your work, and you're reading metal magazines? And we're like, yeah.
You're like, yeah, but I'm going to turn this into a career for the rest of my life. What the fuck do you know,
right?
Idiot?
I will say, though, I don't think I've ever told anyone this story, but at least publicly in this kind of setting. But my years before that, even when I got into music, was Motley Crue and Bon Jovi. And my sister and I decided that it would be cute to lip sync a song for my parents. And I vividly remember them. We did it. They're like, oh, cool, that's cute, whatever. But don't take it too seriously. Like, it's almost like I still hear it today. And I must have subconsciously said, oh, really? Well, wait and see. And here we are all these years later, and it's still all that I give a shit about outside of my family. Like, all I do is everything has to do with music. Every single thing I do.
Everything has to
So,
go. Everything has to do with defying my parents to
yes,
this day.
absolutely.
Do you think that would,
Absolutely.
this is a, I mean, obviously this is, it sounds like a pretty straightforward answer, and I think it's possibly a stupid question, but do you think that that attitude back then, when you heard Green Day and you saw these bands, it just matched, like you were like, oh, this is who I am because I've already felt like this before.
I don't know that I was able to really digest it on a conscious level. I think I just liked the rebellion angle of it, that it was loud, it was abrasive in some form, they looked different and weird. So I don't, yeah, it wasn't conscious, but I can tell you now why some of those bands still matter to me
Yeah.
is that when I put on certain Rancid, actually any Rancid record, any of the any of the good Green Day records, it reminds me of being comfortable to be myself now. Like I didn't know that then, but now if I put on Out Come the Wolves, I will be in such a great mood because it's life affirming that who I've chosen to be, I'm comfortable with. Because for some odd reason, here's this bunch of fucking misfit dudes, and the music they make just reminds me of that. I don't know why, it just does.
I like that. I think a buddy of mine, when I interviewed Brendan from Lawrence Arms about the slapstick days, and he was like, he heard the interview and he's like, dude, I just put on the fucking slapstick album and I'm just been cranking that all day long because it just reminded me of just what I loved about that. So just like going back and hearing those albums, it does bring up that, like that giant smile on your face.
Hmm. But I don't view it like, yes, it's nostalgia. I don't want to deny that, but I still get those feelings.
Yeah,
Not every band can do it for me, but Rancid, early Green Day, any Descendants record, like that band, I still can feel like that kid, even at 42, even with a career and a house and a mortgage and all that stuff. Those things they talk about still resonate.
that's a
Not, you know
great
what I mean?
point. Yeah, dude, that's a great point. There's a hard divide. There's a divide between nostalgia and then when you heard that song, that thing where you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, like that, I agree with that. And to still feel that way now as adults, where maybe you're not really going against the system at all, or maybe, I don't know, some people are, but you listen to that and you're like, yeah, like I can feel that connection to that song, not in oh, this is 20 years ago and this is me. I'm getting a connection when I was 16 or 19. This is a connection of, I still can somehow relate to this fucking song in whatever way.
I mean, even bands that were never a big deal, like I'm kind of having flashbacks of seeing Digger.
Yeah.
Um, I loved that band. I remember meeting them. I remember writing letters to the drummer to try to play a show with my band and his band, and how just totally gracious he was. And when we finally got to play with them, I really still remember it. And listening to that first record, I don't think it's that exceptional if I'm being objective, but it just reminds me of great times and being able to explore who I was and playing in bands. And yeah, there is a fine line, but I don't know. All that music still it just makes me feel alive.
That's really, that's a great way to put it. I mean, granted though, if I listen to Dale, I have the playlist in front of me, so I'm not like pulling these out of my ass or anything, but Dale or I Want My Hat Back, those songs I still listen to and I like jump around. I'm like, oh fuck yeah. Like I can still
Oh, they're
relate to that shit.
so good. They're just fun. Just great, catchy songs. Yeah. Yeah. I still really love those bands. I really do. I actually bought I guess you would say a vintage Digger shirt not too long ago, and nobody else on the planet probably gives a fuck, but I was so happy when it arrived.
I think that's the best. No, that's the best. That is the best shit where, like, even if I go, there's a clothing shop or like an artistic shop here in Raleigh called Munjo Munjo, and they had a rack of just these old band shirts. And I still, when I see that, I go looking through. I'm like, I wonder if there's an old vintage shirt here from a band back then, because I would probably have a limit of, if I was killing it, $100 for a shirt that I really wanted. So with that in mind, if I see one that's like $20, I'm like, how is this not more money? I'm totally gonna fucking buy that.
Right. I mean, I bought. So one of the very first My first concert ever was a Christian metal concert, which was bizarre because I didn't grow up with any of that. But somehow the first show I went to was a Christian metal show. And the first extreme band I ever heard was this Australian death metal band called Mortification, who was Christian. And I recently got one of the shirts from the first album, which is probably 30 years old or just under. And I was over the moon. It meant the world to have it. Just because the record still holds up, I still think it can hold up against all the classic death metal bands, but the band's so not on many people's radar.
You legit have a thing about buying vintage stuff. Like this is
I
the
do.
third time. Wow. Do you have like, are they just shirts? Is there stickers and things like that or patches? I don't know.
I do have a good handful of the patches and stickers from back then. Like I have all the first Bridge 9 stickers that came out in patches, like the very first releases in 97. I have some of the bands, like the local bands, and some of the stickers, but I'm going to say 99% of what I collect is shirts now. Just because I can wear them, to go back to the music, it's like putting on an old Rancid shirt or an old whomever. That means a lot to me. Like I've got a bunch of the Dookie shirts. I don't wear them as much as I should, but I get them and I'm like, oh my God, I always wanted this when I was a kid.
So funny.
Because to track that stuff down when you were with that at that time wasn't as easy as it is now.
No.
We didn't have Hot Topic. Not to sound like an old person, like, oh, we didn't have what you have. I just mean you had to go to the beach and see all the shops they had down there, or it wasn't like every mall had it. And my parents they were supportive, but it wasn't like, oh, you wanted that Green Day shirt? Here you go.
Yeah.
And it's not like I had an income, so.
I never thought about it. I've never thought about going on, what do you go to? And I'll jump off this in a second, but do you go on eBay? Like, where do you buy them?
eBay, Etsy, Depop, Grailed, Instagram is becoming a thing. I've bought shirts from all over the world. Thailand, Malaysia, you name it. I've bought a shirt from there probably.
I'm legit on Etsy right now. I'm gonna keep that open for after this. Wow, yeah, Bad Brains, fucking Void. Jesus Christ.
It's, if nothing else, just really cool. And that's all. I mean, some people give me shit for it, but I'm like, well, in 20 years, these could be worth a fortune because they only get less available over time. And they carry value. And there was just Christie's had a $2 million Supreme t-shirt auction. So
really? Jesus.
Yeah. Well, the newest thing was a month or two ago, the Wall Street Journal ran an article about an Aladdin shirt selling for $6,000, an original from that when the movie came out.
Oh my God.
Yeah, dude. Oh yeah.
What?
Like it's there's a shop in New York called Metropolis that has tons of cool stuff.
This is when people tell me they're like, I don't have any business ideas. I can't do anything. I was like, trust me, anybody will spend any stupid amount of money on something if it means something to them. You just got to find out what that is.
That you're 100% correct. So me spending a couple $100 on a t-shirt, someone's like, well, that's ridiculous. But for me, I'm like, well, they're not. I haven't seen, like, I actually am wearing a 1993 Cannibal Corpse t-shirt from a European tour, which I've only been able to purchase once since I've been collecting, and I had to have it, and I'm super, super excited to have it. But someone else might be like, why would you buy that? You could get a bootleg, or they just reissued them. Nope, I need the original.
Yeah.
No, and I made sure I got one with the right tag, the whole thing, and I couldn't be happier to get it.
Yeah, it's the value that it brings to you, because it's like, you're like, I could drop X amount of dollars, but moving forward in life, every time I see that shirt and get to wear it that day, I'm gonna be so fucking happy. So that's
my gosh, yeah, absolutely. And like just the joy of owning a piece of history, no matter how big or small the band was.
So going back real quick, so Angelo said you were in a band called the Side Effects.
Yes.
Now he spelled it with an A. Did he misspell it, or is that right?
Nope. We thought it was cute to not spell it correctly.
Okay, because I just did a little research to see if I could find you guys anywhere, but there's the Side Effects band spelled the correct way, and they're still a band that's around. So, but they were, what kind of music were they? They're from Stockholm, Sweden. So I was like, this definitely isn't you guys.
No.
So what kind of band were you guys?
I say this lovingly, but we were the worst Bouncing Souls cover band ever.
Okay.
Not for real. Like we didn't cover them, but all three of us loved that band and worshipped them and everything. Even the guitar player's guitar tone was so spot on Pete, and I was dealt with love because that band meant the world to us, but he couldn't sing very well. I couldn't keep a beat. But we tried and we had fun. I don't know that I thought that it would foretell where I was going in my life. But we did a few dates. I think we went as far as Erie, which at the time was super far away, like 6 hours. I don't know. It was fun. I'm super glad we did it, but we were terrible.
Yeah, I mean, did you ever tell them that the guys in the Souls that about your band?
No, no. But I mean, I'm still in touch with one of the guys. No, I don't. I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to what we did because it was fun. I have no regrets, but we were not good. I would think they'd say that too.
Oh no, there's bands back then where I thought they were great, and I listen to them now because there's an archive where Joe Polito he's part of the Jersey scene, and he has the NJPP archives where he has got like I would say thousands of demos from back then, and it's cool to go through because you're like, oh, that band, and you listen to it and you're like, oh, like there's it just some shit just doesn't hold up, and then people say that about like a lot of bands that are great, but some bands from back then you're like, holy shit, this still fucking holds up. Like, were you ever a fan of Boxcar? Did you listen to them?
I knew who they are, but never listened to them.
Like their full length is still fucking awesome. Like the Humble Beginnings EP is still the first one's still great, and there's a lot of good music from back then.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I still actively listen to the Plow United records. I love that band.
Did you listen to the newer one that they put out like a couple years ago?
I did not listen to the most recent one, but the one Marching Band I loved. This is a bit. I can't say I'm the only reason, but when they got back together for Riot Fest, I don't know how many years ago now that was, but I helped that happen in a way.
That's awesome.
A friend of the promoters was like, man, I wish I could get that to happen. And I was like, let me see if I can get a contact. And, I helped get the process started. And so I got to meet those guys and talk about Brian owns a guitar repair shop, and they all have normal lives. I still was so nervous to meet them because I grew up idolizing their band. I thought they were and there was all those kinds of like rumor or legends about how they told Fat Records to get lost, and they seemed like this band that had this like very cool vibe about them. So meeting them, a number of years later was still a big deal to me.
Well, it's like how you said earlier, you were talking about how, when you started managing the Souls, you're like, I can't believe this. Like, there's been interviews I've done where I interviewed Brian and we talk about Plow, and he lives in Chapel Hill, which is only about 40 minutes away. So his band now, last year, they came down to Raleigh and they were playing like 3 blocks down the street. So it's like, I never knew him back then. Our bands played together a couple times, but after the interview, he'd be like, hey man, my band's in town. I was like, oh shit, like I'm busy. He's like, dude, get the fuck down here. And he was just like so funny. And then I ended up going down there last year, luckily a couple months before all this shit went down. And we like sat upstairs and like just drank beers and bullshit. And I was just like, this is so fucking cool to me. Like, just the fact that I can reach out sometimes and just text someone and be like, hey man, like something or about his record store, or try to share it or just bullshit. Like, the fact that these things open up, or like Tom from Goober Patrol likes, like if I post something on Instagram, he likes it. I geek out about this shit, and I'm 41 years old. I'm like, that's so fucking awesome. Like, it doesn't really go away because it's just such a, I don't know, I just held all these people up on this pedestal. Like, you still talk to them like human beings now, but there's still that little party where you're like, wait, this is so fucking cool.
Well, I think it's also because they were part of formative years of your life that helped. Maybe they individually didn't, but the music they made or anything like that helped you get to this place. And
totally,
I don't know. Yeah, I can't. There's been clients who I've started working with. I'll follow them on Instagram. They'll follow me back. I'm like, oh my god. And so 2 things happen. Number one, I'm like, this is so fucking cool. And then it'll turn and go, what's wrong with me? I should not feel this way. But then I'm like, fuck it. This is what makes me me. It's awesome. I don't know. There's clients I've had for 10 years that I still can't believe I represent, who I'm on like it's totally chill, but I'm just like, oh my God, this is rad. And I love that. I actually don't ever want to let go of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of cool to be able to wake up and have that. And some people were going, oh, I have to go to this goddamn job again that I fucking hate. Like, to be able to get stoked on that is pretty dope.
Oh, yeah. I know that I'm one of the most fortunate humans in this entire world, that I get up and I get texts from people in bands that I think are incredible, and that if normal people got to see what I do, they'd be like, oh my God. So I don't take it for granted. at all. It's still mind blowing to me.
So let's talk about the path that got you there because you played in side effects, and then did you start booking shows while you were in that band or after or before?
I
I
mean,
don't know.
I booked a couple shows for us, but it didn't get real until my junior year of college. I went to LaSalle in North Philly, happened to be at the Relapse record store. This promoter named Robbie Red Cheeks, don't know if you know who he is, but he did a lot of hardcore shows. Had a flyer out looking for an intern, and I was the first person to respond. I was eager and got the gig, and so I started being the guy that hung up all the flyers at the truck in the bathrooms before shows. The amount of flyers I hung up for bands that went on to be massive shortly afterward is crazy to me. Um, Papa Roach sticks out. I was like, this band name's terrible. And then shortly after, they're fucking huge and everywhere. But I did that. And then the head booker at the room, a guy named John Hampton, I just kind of like, he kind of got the hint that I was paying attention to what was going on. So he would ask me about bands from time to time. And I had also been working at Magnet magazine as well,
Oh wow.
which was also hysterical because here I would roll in my like H2O shorts and shitty hardcore shirts, and they were like these. They're great people, but more on the stuffy indie rock side. But for whatever reason, they took a liking to me, and I worked really hard for them, so I got exposed to other music. But so then I stayed at both places all this time, and at one point I went to John. I'm like, dude, I'm graduating in the spring. What the fuck do I do? I don't know anybody. It's Philly, like not this robust music scene. So he put me in contact with this woman, Eva, who ran Feta Booking, still does. And he's like, hey, you should hire this kid. So I call her. She's like, okay, come on over. So I start booking bands right away. My last semester of college, I was booking bands, doing 6 classes. I was the associate editor at the newspaper. I booked the Bane show, worked at the library. I did more than anyone should do. And it was probably, but I just was like, this is all I know. I got to just figure this out because I remember halfway through college being like, I can't do this. This sucks. I'm not excited about anything. I hate school. And it just kind of clicked.
What is it about? Okay, you said something that just I want to kind of I hate the word unpack. I want to talk about more. When
Yeah.
when you said you started flying the hell out of things, was there something like you saw at that age that you can remember where other people were doing what you were doing, but you decided, and I'm guessing that you decided to step it up a little bit more than they were?
No. Honestly, I think it was just, I didn't know better. I had no idea. I just, my father taught me how to work really hard. I started working the minute I was legally allowed to work, I worked. And I always had a job, every summer between college years, I had jobs. My last summer before my final year, I was actually literally working like 76 hours a week because I'd racked up credit card debt buying CDs and stuff. But no, I just threw myself at working because I didn't know what else to do. And then it just kind of slowly clicked. It, I, I don't know. I didn't know how to mentally think about it. I just worked. That's all I knew to do.
Well, there's a couple people I've talked to from back then that stood out. Like there was a guy, Ricky Saporta.
Hmm.
Do you know Ricky? Did you ever meet him?
No, but I know the name.
His brother's Gabe from Midtown. And
Yep.
so
We
Ricky
share a birthday.
with Gabe.
Yeah.
When's that birthday?
October 11th.
Oh, happy belated. Not too far,
Thanks.
not too far behind today. 42, nice. So like, there's a couple people that I mean, a lot of people that I've interviewed, and there's I like when I'm talking to them, I see where they took what they were doing to a next level, and I think I've always asked the question of, did you see what you were doing? And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Like Alex Sardi, like where he went from booking shows, then started just roading with Midtown. Like he was like, I kind of just went with it. But
Yep.
it was never like a part. It didn't sound like there was a time where you guys really had a conversation with yourself, where I'll ask bands who have gone on that toured and things like that. I was like, I always ask them, did you guys have an internal conversation as a group on where you wanted to take this? So when you have two or three other people around you, there is more of a possibility of you saying out loud or someone saying out loud, like, where are we going with this? But you as an individual, it seems like you don't really sit in your room and journal maybe and say like, okay, what am I doing right now? Or how can I, be the best at this? Or this is where I want to go with this. It sounds like you guys were all just wired to show up and just kick ass as much as you possibly could at what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, well said. I didn't. There was no grand plan at all. I just knew I loved music. I could barely pay my rent for the first couple years. I think I just kept chasing it because I just kept getting by.
Well, here's a question. I ask this to people now because I've been working for myself for like 16 years and I freelance and, entrepreneurial, blah, blah, blah. But when people come to me, when they'll tell me they want to do something, I'll say, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, narrow it down. They're like, no. I go, well, tell me what you definitely don't want to do. And it's always like, oh, and it's a hardcore or a definitive answer of this is what I don't want. So with you, if you
Mm-hmm.
can you remember when you were doing that and you're like, you can't pay rent, did you have a definitive answer to yourself where you're like, well, this is what I'm definitely not going to fucking do?
No, honestly, it
Interesting.
wasn't like you hear stories about certain people that are like, come hell or high water, I'm going to do this. No, it just kind of kept rolling. I worked at the truck, I remember, and then I worked at Feta for a bit. I remember taking my finals and just throwing the remainder of my stuff in my car and continued booking bands. And then about almost a year into that, I was like, this just isn't working. Like I can't pay my bills. There's got to be a better life. And I reached out to Tim Bohr, who ran Face the Music at the time. I had no plan with that either. I just was like, well, this guy's been nice to me on emails. Maybe, I knew he was in Philly and that was it. He took a liking to me, offered me a job, and that was the next step. And then a couple years into that, it started to make some sense. But again, I was not making a lot of money. Not that was everything, but it wasn't like I was all of a sudden things were exploding for me. But it had momentum. But I think I just kept. I like these bands. Let's go. Keep going.
When you started booking shows so the Troc was the first place you started booking?
I only really ever booked shows. I booked one show in college with Bane and Reach the Sky, but I didn't actually wasn't booking shows regularly.
But you helped promote.
I fell into the agency side. That was the first real job I ever had in the business, and the one I still have to the day.
So you're playing in Lancaster. So you're in Lancaster, then you go to LaSalle, and you're deciding that college sucks ass. And then
As one does.
you start promoting shows and shit like that. So what show you put on a show for Bane at the Troc.
Yep.
What
Mm-hmm.
was I know it was like one show, but do you remember? I'm always fascinated by the process or the behind the scenes of things because there's even when someone's saying it'd be like, well, this seems kind of boring. I'm always intrigued by it, especially because I never had to do it. Like, do you remember what it was like to book that show?
Not really. I just remember loving. I just love that band. Still do. My best friend Mike went to WPI in Worcester and was friends with those guys as they were becoming a band. So there's like a personal connection. I remember when the second album came out, we listened to it an entire summer vacation together, my group of friends and I. So no, I don't remember. No, there wasn't anything specific about like the way it was done that even intrigued me. I never had like a design on the business or an understanding.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be a part of it. Like honestly, I just wanted to not have to get a real job. I remember as a kid, my dad being like, tuck your shirt in, look nice. And me just whole out rejecting that. And so I just wanted to not dress nice and just do what I wanted. That's all that guided me, really. There was nothing else. And I knew how to work. I had worked many shitty jobs. I worked in factories. I used to pack orders at QVC one summer.
Ugh.
I did all kinds of shitty jobs. So actually, as Tim Bohr, he was a big mentor to me coming up as an agent, but he was like, look, I've had shit jobs. So if things get real bad, at least I know what the other side looks like. And I never forgot that if I really had to go work in a factory, yeah, it wouldn't be great, but I knew how to do it and I could get by.
Yeah, but it sounds like there is your no, your definitive no though. You're like, I don't want to wear a suit. I don't, it's micro, but I mean, me personally, I remember waking up or hear my dad wake up at 5 a.m. when I was a kid, and he'd be dressed in a suit. I could smell coffee cooking, and he'd leave and get home at 6 o'clock at night, and I was like, I never want to fucking do that. And like this day, I mean, I'll wear shorts to fucking business meetings. I'm just like, it's just not my
Oh
fucking
yeah,
jam. There's
same.
something that's instilled in you that you're like, I just don't want to do this. But kind of adds that. I think it kind of ties in that whole punk rock ethic where we saw these guys in bands who are just showing up and packing clubs and stuff just dressed like the way that we were dressed. And then, in
Hmm.
my eyes, they were making a ton of money. And now after doing these interviews, I was like, that was definitely not the case.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, they think just wanted to be my. I don't know, even know. Like again, there was no internal dialogue about it. It resonated. It meant the world to me. That's I just connected with it. I've tried to have other hobbies in my life, and it's never fully connected. Nothing else in the entire world connects for me except music.
to go back again to side effects, because Angelo had mentioned that and he's like, yeah, he was in this band called the Side Effects. Like, for him to bring that up,
Uh huh.
and I'm sure people listening, because there's a big group of people that are the majority of the audience listening to this is the tri-state area, but it's expanded. But people, because I've done interviews with like Eric from Creep, Brian from Plow, fucking Chris from Digger, just like Chuck from Weston. Like it's a very Philly centric thing. Like, did you ever play shows with your band with those guys, or were you just like kind of just a couple shows and you were done?
We did. I mean, so we were in Lancaster, and so we played around. Like we actually recorded an EP at the Creep Studios. I was there a couple times.
Oh,
So
oh, cool.
I had met Eric a few times over the years.
We'll talk about that. Talk about Creep Studios, because Eric was talking about that, and he's still recording bands, but he talked about the Creep House, and people have submitted stories about that. Do you remember anything? I mean, again, it could be something very minute, but just the fact that you were there, to me, I'm already intrigued that you
Oh, it
like went
was
there.
there was I believe in my elderly age, my memory's not as good, but I believe he had a partner named Mike, and so we went there, and they were really nice to us. We were again looking back, we were terrible. Whatever, but they treated us really nicely, and I remember because that's back in the real mail order days, so us getting to buy the Dutchland Diesel CDs before they were like technically out, which was really cool. And yeah, I mean, they were again. It was just super cool. Like this house. Like I lived in the burbs. I lived with my family. Nothing crazy. And then they go to this like house in a residential area, which on the outside looked like a regular house, but you walk in and downstairs there's a recording studio and
Yeah.
these like punk people. Not I don't even mean like spiky hair crap, but just like they were doing it, and it was just so mind blowingly cool to us. I ended up going back later in my early days of being an agent with when Kill Your Idols did the Funeral for a Feeling record and got to do gang vocals with them.
So wait, you got to go with Kill Your Idols and do back. How'd you get to meet those guys?
So when I started working at Beta Booking, they were one of Eva's clients. And so I sort of just got to take over. It's all kind of a blur at this point, but I remember being kind of building a bit of a friendship with those guys. And they invited me, and I had Brad from F minus, who happened to be in Philly at the time. We drove down to we drove down to Westchester and did gang vocals and hung out with those guys. Oddly enough, Paul, who was in Killer Arrows at the time, who's now in Black Anvil, has been my best friend for, I want to say, 14 years now, 12, 13 years.
Is Paul the guy who was also in No More Black?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Yep. All right.
Yeah, like we text every day, all day. Um, we, I just, he, we happened to be walking around the neighborhood, my now wife and I remember running into him. He's like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "Well, I live right over there." I was like, "Well, I live right over there." Exchange numbers, and rarely does a day go by that we don't text each other. And a lot of it's like, "Hey, check this band out. Hey, check this band out." Or, we're both always collecting shirts. And so it's funny how it all kind of goes back to the beginning of this too.
That's so funny. I messaged the Kill Your Idols account to try to get in touch with Andy, and they're like, "Here's his email." So I emailed him, and they're like, I was like, "Yeah, he's not responding. I don't know if he doesn't want to do it." They're like, "No, he's just not really good at emailing." I'm just like, "God damn it, I would love to talk to those guys about that whole fucking era."
Well, maybe I'll have to introduce you to Paul after this.
You should totally do that.
I will do that.
That's cool.
No problem. Yeah, he's one of the. Uh, it's interesting going back. So I remember when
Actually,
I
and
was.
Paul would be fucking dope to talk to too. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I kind of had like two sets of friends. I had my like punk rock city friends, and then I had my high school friends. But they never really meshed. Not because they didn't like each other; they were just these different worlds. And Angelo was part of like my city friends. I do have a funny story about that involves Angelo
Yes.
and the police for you.
Yes.
But
I'll make a note of that one if you're still talking the other one.
yeah,
Angelo Police.
shit. What was I going to say about it?
Your city friends and
Oh
your city
yeah,
friends.
like I don't know where I was going with all this, but yeah, Paul has become like my longest standing not high school friend because I unlike a lot of people, like college was not where I made all my best friends. High school, I had this incredible and still do have this incredible group of friends that we got in all kinds of trouble. We did just so much fun shit, discovered so much together that when I got to college, I was like, none of these people will stack up to the friends I have. So I don't care to make any new friends. um, but so I don't remember the year, but at one point, Angelo was living downtown in Lancaster, and he lived on the third floor of this building, and you could see this intersection from his window. And they used to have remember Spy Tech, which was basically like binoculars with like headsets.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
I was not there for the inception of this plan, but was definitely there later for one of the experiences. But they had a 3-man water balloon launcher and Spy Tech. And so on the third floor, you could, if you're parked at that red light, you could see that apartment. So they would turn all the lights off. 3 guys would get up on the roof, and then everyone would, either you're a spectator and could see through the windows, and then there was one person who would have the binoculars who would go, cool, no one's looking, go for it. And they would launch water balloons from the ceiling. And I remember hearing stories about them lighting up buses. Because, a big giant bus rolls down the street, you can just go fucking crazy and light it up. Well, apparently, and I wasn't there for this, and I hope he doesn't get mad for me for telling you this, but apparently one night there was a bunch of bikers at the red light.
Oh God.
And they decided to light them up. And I don't think they hit them, but got close enough. And apparently these dudes they were pretty smart and started to put it together, the angles and everything. And long and short, I guess they got up, somehow ended up in their apartment, like, what the fuck are you doing? Called the cops. Cops came. They denied it till the cows come home. And they were almost about to walk out the door. And someone looks down at the trash can and saw a broken balloon, and the jig was up. But I still remember it. I can see it. It was man, we used to cause so much trouble.
Wait, were these like bikers, like Hell's Angels bikers,
No.
or
just guys on motorcycles?
Oh, okay, they were motorcycles. I was thinking it was like the dudes or the fucking folks who get together and what the fuck, road bikes, like road bikers and in their spandex outfits and shit. I was going back and forth between who am I picturing right now? They just like roll up, they like unclip from their pedals and just like clock up the stairs to this guy's apartment.
I don't remember, truth be told.
I don't think that was a big thing back then.
But there was this one guy, Dave, who used to hang around. I think he was actually there. He lived with them. And he kept making these giant stencils of Bob Ross's head. And he would spray paint them all over town. And it was one Bob Ross with his head was flames instead of the afro, or it was the afro but with devil horns. And it always had the tagline, Bob Ross, enemy of art.
Oh, I love it.
I'll never forget one night he made like a 4-foot by 4-foot stencil. At like 3 a.m, we stayed up late. We went to this giant wall that was right by a Toys R Us. And there was enough, like you could hide behind the wall and wait for all the cars to not be there and jump over and spray paint. And I'll never forget, we did it. And it was like, go, 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 go. And just spray painting. And it was there for years.
I wonder if people listening to this have seen that and they're like, holy shit, that's the fucking Bob Ross guy.
I hope so. It was one of the funniest fucking things. I never drank. I never did that whole party thing. But, man, we raised hell. We used to destroy golf courses. I mean, we were terrible. It's no wonder any car I get, I always have problems with because I was such a dickhead back then. But hopefully the statute of limitations on all this vandalism is well past. But, man, we were troublemakers. I still have a Bob Ross sticker from back then that this dude made. And I'll never give it up, no matter what. It was such a fun time. Still in high school, but, like, could go and do my own thing, could drive and just hang out with these older guys who were just into punk rock and causing trouble.
That kind of reminded me, it brought up the, just thinking of Bob Ross, it connect the dots to the Bob Ross comp that came out back then, Happy Little Trees. Did that ever make its way out to Lancaster?
No. Oh, wait, I mean, I know about it, but that was never part of that dude's thing.
Oh, no, but like, did you know about that comp?
No, I didn't. Sorry. No, I didn't.
Okay, it kind of went back to how you were saying earlier, how there'd be smaller labels putting out their friends' bands and stuff. So like Jersey, that was really what it was. That was how we got on labels. It was that local kids would get some money, always do compilations, and put them out. And there was like White Powder Donuts, Bob Ross, Happy Little Trees, Pinball Records. Did any of these sound familiar to you at all?
Not at all.
Oh, I guess they didn't. I mean, I guess the reach really would have been limited unless a PA band got on them. And I can't, because Jersey, those labels would include. We were so close to Eastern PA, like
Hmm.
Westchester and Philly and all that, and then we were by like New York and New York State and Connecticut, so it would kind of reach out a little bit there. Plus, we had some bands locally that would go on tour, like Big Week would go tour a lot, and they'd bring this shit with them. So I'm just trying to think of like how far that reach was back then, if anyone outside of Jersey heard of them.
Not very far. There was a little crossover. I mean, I remember Motherbox. A couple of those bands made their way to us. Sleeposaurus being one of them. Funny story about Sleeposaurus. My band played in York, Pennsylvania with them.
I have no idea who that is.
So Sleeposaurus, they were a New York band, emo core band-ish. I love them. Very pop punky. But the drummer, I remember meeting the drummer randomly and got along. For whatever reason, there seemed to be an instant bond. Stayed in touch over the years. Turns out then when he was the drummer in Breaking Pangaea, then then fast forward another bunch of years, he was the drummer in Fun when they were touring.
Oh shit.
So yeah, it's just weird how all this comes back around. There's a promoter that I work with now who I met when I went on tour with my friend's band. Or no, I went down to South Carolina to see 7 Seconds. And it was a singer of Stretch Armstrong.
Wait, when was this?
This was in, I want to say 2000.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant like recently. I'm like, wait,
Oh,
what
no, no, no,
the
no, no, no.
fuck?
No, they're not a band anymore.
Oh, okay. It's like shit. So you were flying shows, you booked a couple shows, and then from then on, you became a booking agent.
Yes.
And what year was that?
That would have been January 2001.
So what was it like when you got into it then? Because this is interesting to me to see that perspective because I've talked to bands that they transitioned over that hump into 2000 where everything started to really shift into it just started to expand and sounds became more full but then it became like a fashion show and then some of the bands got just left behind, some of the bands stayed through it, some of the bands really did well. Like from your perspective, like what bands were you starting to book and then how were you seeing everything evolve around that time?
It's a great question. I mean, that was right as like the Saves the Day style bands were really starting to boom. Thursday was coming. Thursday was one of the first bands I ever chased. I booked Fairweather back then, but I also did Hope Conspiracy. Like Equal Vision was the first record label I had any relationship with.
Oh wow.
Who else? I mean, I definitely noticed that bands could have a few records and not have any proper representation. And it wasn't like a bad sign on them. It just was the nature of the business growing. Now a band doesn't even have to play a show. They put out one good song and they've got the agent that books Billie Eilish or whoever.
Wow.
Whereas bands were allowed to kind of develop on their own back then. You signed a record. Just because you put out a record doesn't mean you were getting an agent. Now we're building teams around bands the minute they make the record or before they've even put out the record.
It's funny you said that because this week is going to be the last interview launching for this year until 2021 January. But Nick from Prevent Falls, I interviewed him, and
Oh wow.
yeah, he's coming out, and I talked to him, and I was like, what was it like being on Equal Vision? He's like, well, it was great. He's like, but the thing is that it didn't guarantee you, immediate success because you weren't guaranteed a booking agent. They had so many bands on the roster. He's like, we kind of, some bands can get swallowed up. And also at the same time that they came out, that same week, Coheed and Cambria came out, which blew up. So it sounds like
Yep.
they were kind of like screwed, and then luckily Nash and PJ went on to do Armor for Sleep, and that worked out well for them for a while. But like, do you remember, because you said you Equal Vision, and you said, oh wow, when I said Prevent Falls, like, what triggered you to say that?
I mean, that was the first record label that ever gave me a chance. There was a guy named Jason DeRose who was there for a long time. Dan Sanshaw, I would still say he's a friend. I mean, I remember signing Coheed. I worked with them through the second major label record.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I remember Steve. Actually, this was the big turning point. So Steve knew Tim, my boss. They were friends from way back when. And Steve and Dan drove down to Jersey at the office to meet with us to convince us to sign Coheed. And then like a bunch of weeks later, Tim asked me to help him book a Cannibal Corpse tour. And I remember being irritated, like, I don't want to book this. I don't like death metal. And he's like, listen, dude, that's cute that you don't want to do this. But this band that you just signed, that nobody has any fucking idea what's going to happen. Nobody knows if it's a boy or a girl. This thing could explode or could go nowhere fast. You got to sign bands that can help keep your lights on while you take these other chances.
Wow.
It's actually some of the best advice I ever got in my whole career, period.
Yeah.
But, and obviously their story is, everyone knows it exploded, the whole thing. But as that was happening, I got to book like these EVR showcases. I remember booking a Kill Your Idols American Nightmare tour after they signed EVR.
Wait, was American Nightmare, were they the band that changed their name to Give Up the Ghost?
Yes, they were.
Okay. I remember that whole legal debacle thing. All right, sorry.
Yeah. I did Fairweather there. I did HopeCon there. Who else did I do? I actually remember Dan flew me to Detroit to see Bear vs. Shark. Saw them in a basement. It was amazing, but I still never ended up signing them, which was kind of a mistake. I did Fear Before the March of Flames. Had one of my first really awkward experiences. They came to my house and played me the new record. And I remember not liking it on first reaction, but they were in my house. So I couldn't show them that I didn't like the record. And so to this day, I don't like listening to new music in front of the artist, because then you're forced to be like, it's great.
Wow, that's hilarious. I mean, such a great takeaway too. Be like, all right, moving forward, never again.
Because I ended up loving the record like a month later. I made a lot of mistakes. Like as a kid, as a younger agent in the business, there's many bands that I would listen to at first listen and go, that's fucking terrible. And then 2 years later, be like, oh God, I blew it. That band's amazing. I love it. I remember at the time when Mike Chem was coming up, Jeff from Thursday told Tim and I to talk to Gerard, and I just didn't get it. I did not get it at all. And I don't remember the call, but I do remember I spoke to Gerard. In hindsight, I blew it because the band's amazing and their music is great. I just didn't hear it at the time.
Yeah, but like that first record, the Vampire one or whatever the fuck, that like I saw them there was a Hellfest, like it was like Hellfest 2003. They put a DVD out and they were featured in it, and I'm watching them play that song. I was like, I don't fucking get this. But then Three Cheers for Whatever came out, and then Not Okay, that song. I heard that and I was like, oh, I get it now. This band is incredible. And then Black Parade came out, and I was like, this record is fucking flawless. I have never heard something where I was like, I didn't realize what I was about to hear. But that first record, if you were to hold up that and Black Parade next to each other and be like, this band's going to do this, I'd be like, get fucked. There's no fucking way that's going to happen.
Well, at the time, I didn't realize that you kind of have to hear where they're going, not where they are.
Well, if you were to listen to that now and listen to that album, if you can remember it at all, is there a song that stands out to you that would have triggered it? There you go.
No. At that time, I didn't. So I think part of getting into punk rock was that you rejected everything that wasn't punk. I remember being in college for the first 2 years, like, if it's not punk or hardcore, please never play it for me. And then it changed. It was the first Mike Ness solo record that it really started to change for me. That I was like, oh, singer-songwriter music, Bob Dylan, Tom Waits, this stuff is amazing. And then obviously I realized that I went back to whether it was the grunge stuff or the hair metal stuff that I loved, and was like, it's okay to like not punk.
Well, I think some bands kind of transition us too, because at that time there was the post-hardcore bands where bands would split up and then you'd get their aftermath, right? Like, this is the time that Jets to Brazil came out after, years of Jawbreaker. And when Jets to Brazil first came out, I was like, I do not get this. It took me until 2004 where someone was playing Chinatown from the first album, and I was like, holy shit. And that's when I got into Jets to Brazil. But back then, my point, like back then though, is that there were these bands that were giving, like Braid came out and Promise Ring, and Jimmy World was always fucking awesome in my eyes. But that helped you expand that shit. I never really got into the folk I never dug the folk. The only person I actually like that's like Frank Turner, but I'm typically not the, oh, cool, they're on an acoustic guitar, and that's it. I'm usually like, eh.
I don't know. I just loved Social Distortion, and I remember when that first solo record came out, and he had the Bob Dylan cover. I just was like, "Whoa, what is this?" And so I mean, this is when you would go to the CD store, and when I was in Philly, we would go to, I forget, I think it was it Virgin? I don't remember, but we just go and stack up, and I just kept buying Dylan records and Tom Waits records, and then I got into Johnny Cash and all that kind of stuff.
You know what's funny though? I was talking about this with someone where nowadays you can listen to an album for free on Spotify, and you can say right there if you don't want to listen to more. I think what gave us more of our skin in the game back then is because we were so young and we didn't have that much money. So whenever we bought an album, it was going to heighten whether we loved or hated it even more.
Well, you had to do the work. You actually had to just, you would go home, you'd put it in tape, CD, record, whatever, and then you just rip out the lyric sheet and read the lyrics, see what bands they thanked. Their thank yous list was almost more important than anything else,
Yeah.
because that's how you also discovered other bands.
I wonder how many bands like that, because my friend, so my buddy Chris, he was like the guy who introduced me to all this stuff. He was the one who would always be buying music, so I was like, well, I don't really have to buy that much because I'm always hanging out with him and he's always playing it, and then I can just listen to this shit. But he would buy some shit fucking albums from back then. But then the thank you list would lead, even that shit album would lead to the better albums, because again, you'd go through the thank you list of the shitty bands albums, and then you'd get the next one, and it's like, well, I saw this on that record, and then you'd buy this, you're like, oh my god, I can't believe I found this record because of that record that I didn't like. I didn't even think about that until right now. Yeah, that like even the crappy records had a purpose.
They did.
Good job, shitty bands.
It's funny you mentioned Jets Brazil, because I remember seeing them a lot, but even before the first record, because I was in Philly, so they would pick up dates in New York, Philly, and DC or whatever, with whether it was The Promise Ring or G Meet World, that I saw them, and I just couldn't stand it. But I remember one day I just drove out to Angry Young and Poor to buy records, and I was like, I don't know why, but I'm going to buy this record, the first record, and I just fell madly in love with it ever since. But it took me a while.
And that was Jets Brazil?
Yep.
Yeah, that record, the last song, Sweet Avenue, I heard that and I love that.
So good.
But I never understood the rest of it because my taste in music was still evolving. And I've said it before, when I first heard Frames and Canvas, and I always fuck that up. I always think it's Frames and Canvas or Frame and Canvas by Braid. And I remember when I first heard it, I was like, I know I should like this. I see why I could like this, but I don't love this. And then years later, my ears had developed into being like exactly like you said, oh, it's not punk rock, it's shit. Or for me, it was like I really liked heavy stuff. If it wasn't that, it was crap. But then it started, the two kind of meshed, and then like the technical side of it came out. So when I heard Braid later on, I mean, that was on repeat for like years in my like mid 20s. So it's like it takes some time to develop that.
Oh, I think that's a great point, because you might like something just because your friends like it. Well, they like it, so I just like it. And then as you get older, I mean, I remember we used to love Harvest, if you remember that old straight edge hardcore band.
Harvest.
And then I forgot about them. They were on Trustkill. And then years later, I pulled it out and was like, yeah, I can't wait. And I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. How did I ever listen to this?
Yeah, dude, that's so disappointing. But it's also crazy because I never listened to Botch back in the day, and the only reason I heard of them is because I read there was an interview with them in AP years ago, and I didn't realize the guitar player was the same guy in Minus the Bear. I was like, how? And then they're talking about this like mathcore band, and I went back and listened to that record. I was like, I would have fucking loved this shit back then, because it was just like in my wheelhouse, where it was like Dillinger is, you listen to it and it's like your mind just gets blown. And then there's the records where like Every Time I Die, he's got melody, and there's more, like you can hear some hits in the Every Time I Die stuff. And then Botch was kind of like a weird little mix where I can hear a little bit of melody over the craziness. But yeah, I don't really know what's going with that, but I really like that band.
I never got into it. It always missed me. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, I mean that's okay. That's the funniest thing though, is that even if people are in the music industry or in conversations like this, you have to just stay true to you just being a fan of what you want to be a fan of. And
Mm-hmm.
even if you're talking shit about an album, or you know, you're not talking shit about that, but you could say what you like or you don't like. That's just purely you saying, this is like, that's something I think I take away from being younger and growing up in the punk scene, is that I'm allowed to just be like, no, man, this didn't work for me, and I can say that. Granted, if I was talking to someone face to face, I'd probably be like, uh-huh, yeah,
Of
uh-huh, because
course.
I've said in
Yeah.
so many interviews where I do not like, or I could listen to it, but I never loved um, a Get Up Kids album, something to write home about. I just never. I always liked. I thought 4 Minute Mile and Woodson were their last best albums. After that, I'm just like, it just didn't fucking do it for me. There was a couple songs I liked, but I would never sit there and listen to it for hours.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's. But it's all circumstantial. Like I remember seeing them at Stalag 13 in Philly, which was just a fucking scary old, squat house. And so when something came out, that was like the culmination of seeing them in all these dives. And I get why you would say that, but for some odd reason, I just loved the band. And
Oh, I love.
yeah,
It's like I love the Get Up Kids, and I just didn't love the when everyone around me was like, "This is the best shit ever." I was like, I don't fucking get it. Like I got it, and I love James DeWeese and Coalesce, and I love Reggie. I just didn't love the keyboards in Get Up Kids. I thought it just kind
interesting.
of it took away from. I think adding keyboards to anything, and again, this is like the shit where I put it out there and this thing's circulating. I know it's gonna get back to people, and it's not said with hatred. It's just me. This is what I personally like or don't like. But it's like I think when sometimes keyboards get added to a band where it's been established that I didn't hear them without keyboards, like the Anniversary, they were established with keyboards, so that's how you listen to that band. I got established with Get Up Kids as just this rough record 4 Minute Mile that's like I think it took like a day to record and mix. I mean, just what it sounds like. But I love that rawness. When it got polished, I wasn't used to it, and I was like, man, I
That's a
miss the
great
old
point.
shit.
I get that. I do. I actually really do. And there was a uniqueness to the raw recordings of 4 Minute Mile and Woodson. And
Yeah, his voice was like just pushing those boundaries, and it was so high, and I could see why he stopped going so high because you can't sustain that shit
no,
at all.
no, God, I would love. Man, that band was a big fucking deal to me for a while. And I remember seeing them at the church in Philly. And we all, I forget why, but there was issues with the show. It was them and at the drive-in.
Oh man, yeah, I saw them on that tour, or I missed them on that tour, but we hung out with James DeWeese after the show, at my friend's college in Sacred Heart, and he was the funniest fucking dude. But I think they played there next with your show.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's all blur, but I just remember seeing so many shows at the church, like in college. I remember seeing at the drive-in. I got the Fearless Records comp, the cassette, and hearing the at the drive-in song. I was like, "This is really cool. We should go see this band." And I thought they were just a quirky pop punk band. Boy, was I dead wrong
Uh huh.
when how crazy they were. And it was like 35. It was them and Knapsack, and it was like maybe 35 people in the room. And he's performing to like whether it's like an arena or something, jamming his head in the bass drum and swallowing the mic and just being fucking insane.
So are you talking about the show that was at the school that Jeff Kish from Dawson High put on?
No,
There's a video of it because I just interviewed him. His interview came out a couple weeks ago,
I saw that.
and
Yeah,
yeah, he talks about that at the very end. He's like, "Yeah, I used to put shows on." He's like, "I did this like one show with like at the drive-in and Knapsack." I'm like, "Wait a minute, hold on, what?"
it's probably that tour.
It was that tour, I think so, because that show was up by Pittsburgh, and there's a video on YouTube. If you look it up after this, look up at the drive-in school show or something in PA, and he's got like Cedric has short slicked back hair, and he's like putting his head in the piano that's in the
Mm-hmm.
school and shit like that.
Yep. Yeah,
And
our heads exploded when we saw them. I remember meeting the drummer. Actually went on to book Sparta briefly,
yeah. Oh,
which was strange.
wait, you were
Hmm.
booking agent for Sparta?
I was for a minute.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, I love that band.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's a story I'd rather not tell how that all came to not work. But
That's
long
fine.
story short, yeah, I booked them for a minute. It was pretty rad.
Jesus. Yeah, you could always tell something's a little bit off where I'm not. I'm just gonna say it's like just to say I fucking love At the Drive-In. I have an At the Drive-In tattoo. Like I am diehard At the Drive-In fan. You gotta be something's got to be said about a dynamic of a band where they break up, they go their separate ways, and then they get back together, and then all of a sudden they're on tour, and I'm looking at a video. I was like, that's not Jim on the stage. And
Yeah.
I saw
God.
him do a TED talk, and he was like definitely a weird guy. So I could see from an outside perspective that I don't know what the fuck's up with them. I just know I've read things, and I could see that if someone's clearly not there after years of not being together, and you come together and they're not there anymore, then you're like, all right, that there is just something that just does not work, and that's just what I'm gonna see. And I have no idea what the fuck happens, but
I remember when they got back together and everyone was excited, and then I wasn't there, but I had heard that the Coachella performance was so bad, so uninspired.
uh-huh.
And then I kind of have not been able to go back and listen to those records kind of with the same enthusiasm. Sorry.
Well, like Relationship of Command.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I just found it. I just found this book of CDs. My mom had them in. She just moved down to Savannah, so she was like, "Hey, you come visit me, grab your stuff." And I had these two booklets of CDs, and I was like, "Well, I guess I'll just throw these. I don't have to do this." I'm like, "Wait a minute, I have a CD player in my Jeep." So now I've been just like listening to CDs, which is the coolest shit ever because it sounds so much better. But I put Relationship of Command in. I don't know what you know, and I don't want to know because that record fucking rocks.
Oh, the record's amazing. Don't get me wrong. I love the band. I remember seeing them in Casino Out. Love them. A
hmm
Relationship of Command is untouchable. Uh, I've got a weird relationship with reunions because I know why they happen most times.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that everyone isn't entitled. They are. I'm so happy for the fans that get to see those bands. If they weren't old enough or what have you, I just find that in most instances they're just not. I just know too much. That's all.
Yeah, you know how the sausage is made, basically.
But this time last year, I remember seeing the Misfits in Philly, and I had an absolute fucking blast. So
Well, they never really stop, though.
no, but seeing Glenn with Jerry was really cool.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's right. You played with them last year. Yeah, I could totally see that. Well, dude, I could ask you a bunch of questions, but I want to be, aware of your
Go
time.
ahead,
Well,
keep
okay,
going.
so a couple of them. Was there, okay, I had mentioned before there was that transition into the early 2000s. Now, you came from not playing, like, how long was Side Effects around?
Couple years.
Okay, so like, but you guys never really got that never really became the thing where you looked back in hindsight and said like, "Fuck, man, we were in the scene, we were playing, like we were going somewhere." It was just like, "Oh, we played in the band, and but these other things I'm doing are bigger than what that was."
It just kind of fizzled out. We went to college, and just okay. In high school, it was great because you've got school and that's it. So I did that, but then as I went to college and we all kind of just went our separate ways, it just kind of fizzled. There was never like a we're breaking up. It just kind of it fizzled, and then I just had this weird dead zone between that and then when I started working at the Troc and Magnet and booking.
But it's like when you're a band that had a bit of, you felt like you were going in a direction, and when it stops, you kind of get this Al Bundy syndrome, right? Where you're like, you had the four touchdowns in one game one time, and you always want to
Nah,
relive that. But like, you didn't have that. But like, my thing is, so you going into the 2000s, you were more of a fan of music instead of the person who was like sad that you weren't able to create it going into that time. So
correct.
when you were seeing this as a fan of music, as a fan of the scene, you saw where it was going. Now you're plugged in where you're actually making this shit happen because you're booking shows. Was there a part of you that was a little, I'm not going to fill in the words, like what was your viewpoint of that?
Well, old story. I heard someone once told me that a great deal of the people in the music business are failed musicians who weren't good enough to make it. And so I knew that I wasn't talented enough to be in a successful band. I didn't want to do the work. I just wanted to play. Like my parents tried to get me drum lessons, and I just want to put on records and play to them and have fun. So it was. I mean, I always wanted to be on. I did want to be on stage, and I think I thought I had it, even though I deep down knew I didn't. I just always wanted to be close to it. That's really all it was. I wish I could tell you some crazy story, but it's really just as simple as the allure of music. Once I got the bug, I never lost it.
But when you went into like when you started booking bands around that time where the scene shifts and you're watching that from the outside perspective, did you feel like this whole podcast is based on the early 2000s, like late 2000s or the late 90s, early 2000s punk scene because like I just didn't I chose not to start a podcast about we're going to talk about 2003 and on because as much as there
Yeah.
are many bands that I love then at that time, my heart goes to the late 90s, right? And so like you taking that and going into the 2000s, was there a kind of a disappointment as you're starting your career but booking bands and creating a scene that's like just gone?
No, not at all. I think, I mean, I was an agent for maybe a year and a half when I had signed Coheed and things started to get some momentum. And so I think I just was grateful for a job
Hmm,
and to be able to pay my bills and not have to ask my dad for money. Honestly, like I don't think I knew to think anything else. Just here I am. I'm working in music. I can pay my rent and I can eat. I, I'm not a person of extravagant, taste. I don't like cars. As long as I slept on a mattress on the floor until I met my wife, for crying out loud. So like, no, there was never a sadness. I think I just was thankful that I got to be around something I liked.
interesting. That makes
Because then,
sense.
but sorry to add to that,
No, add to it, please.
the bands that I liked as a kid were only still getting bigger as I became an agent. So whether it was Face to Face still being a big band, or the Bouncing Souls, or I was peripherally around them, even if I didn't represent bands that were on tour with these bands, they were still in my sphere, if you will. And then like when I booked Fairweather, I ended up going on a tour with them and Strike Anywhere for like a week. And so I just was living the life as a young person with no responsibility. And somehow it all just kept coming together, even if I didn't realize how.
Interesting.
Actually, I got off that tour. I make it sound like I'm a tour guy, but like I was in DC. I was on like a Greyhound headed back to Philadelphia where I was living, and it was 9/11. And I remember being on the bus, and there was some like sketchy looking guys behind me, and all I could hear was like something terrorist, and I was like scared. And then obviously I get back to Philadelphia on the bus, and it was obviously much more real of what was happening in the world. But yeah, I was in DC that morning. Somehow I
Jeez.
don't realize how afterwards I ended up being allowed to leave in the bus to go to Philadelphia.
Man, that's like always a key component that I always forget is that time period of 2001, that was such a obviously gigantic changing moment when I never think to connect that. And I don't know if that really had an effect on the music scene in the style and everything changing. I can't see that possibly doing that.
I
But
don't think so,
but it did
but
disrupt shit. Like right now, obviously there's a giant disruption because you can't go and play shows or bands can't play shows and like you clearly can't go anywhere in the world except for underground ones where people are doing this shit and spreading this crap. But
right.
like and I can understand why people are doing it because it's frustration and I'm not gonna shame them for it, but it's back then you could still go and do things that just people mentally were checked out because they're like, wow, this is kind of scary. But eh, yeah, I guess I don't know. Really, I was like I'm trying to see. I'm not trying to connect the dots between that and like why the music fucking changed, but it's like maybe there was a bit of a weird effect then.
Well, I think you just had this explosion. Green Day hits, and then all the labels wanted their own version, and then
Mm,
come to find out there's this whole undercurrent of all of these bands making similar-ish music. And I just think more bands realize there could be a real future than just playing in a band for fun.
oh, totally. Yeah.
And then I think as you go into the 2000s, there's more bands, and then there's more of a need for industry around it. And so I think it really just grew is all it is. There's more labels. There was more. I think it was the real start. With you mix the DIY ethic, and then you mix in a bunch of kids who had these for lack of a better way of saying it, these alternative, childhoods where they were going to concerts and they weren't doing what every other kid did. And then you were like, wait a minute, I might have a fighting chance to make this how I pay my rent.
Yes.
You know, and
100%.
I think it was partly because you were just. I mean, I remember, well, not vividly, but like I just lived weekend to weekend to see my friends and go to shows or go to record stores. My best friend Mike, who I mentioned earlier, there were summers where every day we could, we'd try to find a new record store and just buy used CDs or just look for new bands to discover. That's literally all it was
Yeah.
because we just were so enamored with the whole thing.
I think it's like a mixture of that too. And we were also younger and bored.
Yeah, you're young, you're bored, you can't really. I mean, you're working, but you're just living for the next thing in front of you. You don't have the foresight, and so I think just yeah, as you go into the 2000s, all these people who had bands that became something they probably started making a little money, not a lot, but they were making enough that it was like, well, let's just see what happens.
And money, when anybody gets money, I think it shows them shows them or the people around them 100% who that person is, how you can handle money. So if you're getting it and you're not used to it, you're either gonna be very grateful and you're gonna not be crazy about it, or it's going to change your mindset a little bit.
Well, you just again, you're all of a sudden you blink, you're 24, 25, you're still single and young, but you get to do what you want to do. You're in full charge, and now you're touring the country in a van with your
Interesting.
friends,
That
and
is
then all
a
of a sudden you're
great point. That's a great fucking point, dude. Yeah, you're 24, you could do what you want, and you're touring, getting up on stage, and people are looking at you and like singing your music back. That's a really good fucking point. Yeah.
well, think about it from a even bigger scale. So maybe this will all tie it all together. Um, so I moved to Canada 3 years ago, and over that Christmas break, I ended up rewatching Some Kind of Monster. And prior to that, I had been in a very firm fuck Metallica phase for a very long time. And for whatever reason, with their last album, something clicked, and I was like, this is actually good. I'm going to pay attention again. And it had been a very long time since I cared. And so I watched it again and went, oh, they're not assholes. They're just these people who became so successful and insulated that they didn't know anything else. They were famous from 20 years old to now they're like what, mid 30s. They're massive global rock stars. How else? I mean, how else were they supposed to react?
Yeah, that's a really
And
good
so
fucking
that,
point.
and then so you start to fast forward, and I remember I worked at an agency that did film and television, and I remember hearing that Al Pacino was a client, and they were like, "Dude, he's fucking crazy." But then if you like take a step back and look at it, the guy's been famous for well more than half of his life, so he probably can't even go to the bathroom and take a leak without being harassed for a picture, or "Dude, you were great in that movie," or whatever. It changes the way you view things.
Yeah?
So I think you're in this insular punk rock world. You're playing VFWs and small clubs, and all of a sudden you can pay your rent, and people think you're a god in this small world. Why not keep seeing what happens? And then all of a sudden you blink, you're 40, you're married, you got kids. How else? You don't have any other skills. You got to keep being in your band.
Yeah, or if you don't do that and you go out and get a job, it's carrying with you that you're like, ugh, I was in a band and now I'm doing this shit job maybe. I mean, I think in general, and I'm gonna wrap this up, but like I think that in
Yeah, no
general,
worries.
I think it comes down to this is more like the big thinking me, but it's just, I have to get up every day. I have to make my own money all the time. Like it's hard, but at the same time, I wake up and I go, I get to decide what the fuck I get to do. Now, I do that because I don't want to work for anybody else. That's like my guaranteed no. Like I'm not employable, and it's hard. It's not saying it's easy, but I chose to not do that because I was like, I don't want to be that person who's going to a job that I fucking hate, and I want to call my own shots because I got a taste of it when I was 18 and was on tour. But like, we'd come back home, we had to get jobs, but I was like, I like that freedom. So I think that if someone, I'm just kind of like connecting, I don't know how I'm doing here, but it's like if there is someone in a band and they are like, oh, what am I going to be next? It's like you're like you gotta, I don't know, you gotta fucking figure it out and not live this again, the Al Bundy lifestyle. Like shit was great once and now it's crap. It's like, well, no, you can always still have the ability to make shit awesome.
I think so too. And in a weird way, I think if I had not found punk rock and gone to all the VFW shows and all that kind of stuff, I don't think I'd have the life I have now. Forget the business side of it. But I feel like there was this inherent appreciation of this community, and not to like romanticize it, but I just think it gave us a framework in some way.
Oh, totally.
Like
Absolutely.
a unique social circle, that there was a place for us, and so that we didn't have to go and do the normal 9 to 5 nonsense that our parents wanted us to have, even if their intentions were good. You know what I mean? Like, because I think about it from my job. I see bands that just, you get signed to a major label and you want to explode instantly. But then I look back and see these bands that actually had a whole community and a network to grow from.
Oh, dude, like 100%. Like even now, the kind of messages I get or the emails I get from people, they don't just say, "Hey, dude, I really like enjoyed that interview." They like give me paragraphs about why that band or that show they saw and how it still has such a big impact on them. Like people, it's a testament to what this whole conversation is about. It's about that time and that framework and like what we got from back then. It's not like we had like again, it's another Al Bundy reference, but like we were on the championship team that one year in high school and we're like reminiscing about those high school days. It's like, no, we are all either coming out of high school or out of high school. It was like a transition into adulthood and community and like building a tribe and ethics and not how to not to be an asshole and also like how you can do DIY. It was like it it taught everyone all these things, and then all at the same time of it, we had a soundtrack like the whole fucking time,
Mm-hmm.
and
We
which
did.
causes muscle memory. So every time we think of these songs, it brings us back then, and then we think about ourselves now. Like I still live exactly what I wanted to live like back then, based on then. It sounds like you went in that direction based on then. People I've interviewed still have gone in that direction, even if they're not in bands anymore. They still like will be like you. They'll collect vintage shirts, or they'll like still like try to record music. They'll still go see shows, or they'll still just not be a dick to people. Like,
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'll leave you with. I don't know if you're a fan of The Office,
yeah, love it.
but I remember that scene in the last episode when Andy says, "How do you know you're in the good old days? Like when you're in it, how do you know it?" And I think about that all the time. And this is
Yeah.
a very corny and romanticized, but I actually fully believe that I'm still living in them because because this music thing, because that brings the color that makes me feel good to be me. And I relate that back to my high school friends that I'm still friends with, and the music that we ran, and then I've been able to be that in some way, albeit not I'm not on stage now. I never want to be on stage or be on tour, but that time has now gone. But
That's awesome, man. No, I think that's a great way to end this before the two questions I'm gonna ask you.
go ahead.
I love that though. But well, cool, man. Well, I am gonna let you go.
Okay.
I could feel like I could talk to you for fucking ever, but I'm not gonna do that.
I know this is great. Well, I have to tell you that I was so flattered to be asked, because hearing Angelo's story, I love Angelo. We've done a lot together over the years, and he turned me on to a lot of music and experiences. And fuck, he let me sit in on an interview with him and Henry Rollins when I was in college, and I sat there like a fucking chump. And then I get my one chance to ask a question, and I was like, when are you coming to Philly? And he just looks at me and goes, I was just there. It's like, fuck, I blew it. And like, it's just all the fun shit, a lot of the fun stuff I did in high school and college, and just but anyway, hearing him talk about the bands, and I remember seeing his band play a hardcore show. They stuck out like a sore thumb, and
Uh-huh.
but I just, man, I really, really look back on that time in my life as was just awesome. It was so cool that I got to meet and experience so many people, and all those bands still Plow, Digger, and I never liked Weston, oddly enough. They're fine, but I just never really cared.
That's so funny. They've been such a staple in this show. I love them.
I
Yeah, it's a
saw them
different
with,
taste though, man. I can see. I can see where people
yeah, I
are
mean,
like, I don't connect the dots.
I respect them. It just never clicked. I guess that goes back to what you were saying. Like, they opened for Rancid, and it was them, Rocket from the Crypt, and Rancid in
Oh
Harrisburg.
my God.
Weston was fine. Rocket from the Crypt went on so late that I was so angry that they were on late because I just wanted Rancid. To this day, I still fucking hate Rocket from the Crypt. And my wife still brings this up to me. And she goes, "You're still holding that against them all these years later?" I'm like, abso-fucking-lutely. Fuck that band. They delayed me seeing Rancid. And to this day, I love Rancid. They make a lot of weird, quirky decisions and mistakes, in my humble opinion, but I still fucking love that band.
That's awesome. If I ever get a chance to interview Rock from the Crypt, I'll ask him, be like, what made you guys go on late that one time? Maybe there'll be like um, retribution for you. You'll be like, oh, that guy's mom died. I guess
Yeah,
I'll let
yeah,
it
no,
go.
no, no. Let me have this. Let me hold on to this because it still makes me laugh. I still remember it. But if you interview Lars, that dude's one of my favorite guitar players ever. Just a great fun player. Anyway, this has
All
been super fun, and I really, really appreciate this.
No, absolutely, man. And real quick, anyone who hasn't had a chance to listen to Angelo from Grieving the Eucalyptus interview, it's fucking awesome. And I mean, I love every interview I've done, but that one was definitely, it just went in the direction I didn't was going to go in, and it was such a great fucking conversation. And but yeah, and this has been fucking awesome too, dude. I'm really happy you
Well,
did
thank you.
this. And all right, so yeah, two questions. One, what would you like to plug? It could be about something you're doing, or you can throw it at someone else that you know is doing something and you want to give them some love.
Oh my God, I have nothing to plug other than just keep listening to music and don't lose your love for it. I don't know. I felt like I had a reconnection with it 3 years ago through Metallica, oddly enough, and I think I'm more of a fan of music now than I've ever been in my entire life.
Okay. Well, then the last question, this might tie into that. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Wow. What scene ethics do I hold on to? I want to say kind of all of them. I mean, this is corny and I don't like this band anymore, but I think about H2O and that first record and like all the corny references they make, like knowing your roots and your family and all that kind of shit. I mean, I'm still friends with all the same people. I know where I came from, you know? One of my, when I was coming up, I always would do shows with Jeremy Weiss from CI Records in my hometown. And for the longest time, I refused to work with anybody else. And there was always another promoter there who wanted the shows. And I was like, nope, I'm sorry. If it wasn't for Jeremy, I wouldn't know about this industry. I wouldn't know about all these bands. My life would not be the same. So I'd like to think that's what I still hold on to. And I'm still straight edge after all these years.
And you still what?
I'm still straight edge after all these years.
I thought you said strange. I was like, that's a self-reflection. Still straight edge.
No, I mean I am, but it's I'm not making some crazy. No, I'm still absolutely straight edge though.